Okay, ready? Hello, Mark. Hello, Gary. How are you? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Sadly, I have to say that this is going to be the last week of what has been lots of fun and truly a lot of very, very good conversation and discussion that I have found very, very enlightening on a very important topic. Perhaps we appreciate more. I know that I appreciate this topic much more now, having prepared and taught for the last 6 weeks on these ideas, understanding the importance that we have in advocating and being a voice for change in the American punitive system and in the way people are punished for their crimes. And what we're going to talk about today, so this is what we talked about for the last 5 weeks, going the wrong way. Previously we talked about the consequences of doing your crimes, right? And there's consequences, and it's important for people. How are you? All right, Dennis, it's okay. It's important for people to recognize that if you're going to commit a crime, there's going to be a consequence. Correct? Going to be a consequence. You should learn it eventually, like the guy that was driving home and he gets pulled over by a cop for speeding. And okay, he gets a ticket. The next week he's driving home, and guess what? Never happened to me, but he gets pulled over by a cop, the same cop, in the same place for speeding again a week later. So the cop says, "Didn't I pull you over just a week ago?" And he says, "Yes." Same guy. So he says, "Didn't you learn your lesson? Didn't you learn anything from getting pulled over?" He says, "Yeah, I learned something. Need to start taking a different street home from work every day." So there's a consequence to our crime. If you don't get it, then you're going to get the ticket again the next time. However, what we're going to discuss today is going to be to understand not the consequence of crime, but how crime is a consequence of certain factors, which we shall discuss, God willing, over the next hour and a half. And by mitigating some of these consequences that have led to crime, we can, instead of dealing with the punishment after the crime is committed and imprisoning the person, how to deal with the person that committed the crime, if we could prevent the crime from ever happening, that would not only be the most cost-effective, but also be the happiest, most healthy, holistic way of ensuring a safe society to live in. Correct? So really, today's class is the most important of the series in trying to understand how to change our perspective on crime preemptively as opposed to just afterwards. So let's begin with a text number 1, page 186. Now this text we already read in lesson 2. It's not a new text, but we have a different message. Ken, you want to start?
The Sanhedrin that executes once every 7 years is called a destructive court.
Okay, so in lesson 2, when we read that, how are you? You need a book? You have a book. You have a book? When we learned the quote that you just read in lesson 2, how do we explain this? Do you remember?
Yeah, we said the court that executes somebody is really against Jewish.
Meaning, something is wrong with their procedures. Because by Jewish law, to actually execute someone would require so many steps or levels of verification to know that there were 2 witnesses that witnessed it firsthand. The person was warned and was aware of what they were doing, etc. They had to be threatened before. So there was a lot of hoops to make sure that the person was not, God forbid, innocent person being put to death. That's how we explain this text in its simple reading in lesson number 2. However, what happens if a court examines all of its procedures and it sees that it's doing everything right, and they didn't, cut any corners or get carried away, and there was indeed enough witnesses, and they were warned, and they did everything properly, and they still come to a second death sentence within the period of 7 years? Do they not execute the second person? They do. We said that they do. So why is the court called destructive? The Mishnah didn't give any room for exception. The Mishnah said any court, any Sanhedrin that executes more than once every 7 years is destructive. If they're doing everything right, and there happen to be a lot of criminals, it's not their fault. Can you blame a court if there's a lot of criminals?
Or is it?
Or is it their fault? Very good. Very good. And so, actually, yes, you're correct. You can tell where I'm going. I'm kind of setting it up. Very good. Good analysis. So our answer, good students, right? You're following where we're going. So our answer will emerge from the following medrash, which is going to basically put the blame for the crime happening at the Sanhedrin, at the judge, at the court. The context, you'll read for us, but the context of text number 2 is there was a story in the book of Judges of a terrible crime of a woman that was raped and killed by a number of men from the tribe of Binyamin. Created a huge upheaval in the community. The story is not relevant for right now, but the point is that the blame was laid for this, not on the criminals that did the crime, but on the Sanhedrin. You want to read text number 2?
The members of the great Sanhedrin, who were appointed by Moses and Joshua, should have bound iron chains to their loins and raised their garments over their knees, and traveled to Lachish, Bethel, Hebron, and Yerushalayim, to all the Jewish settlements, in order to teach morality to the Jewish people. They should have done this for the first few years upon their entry to the land, until the Jews had settled in and appointed local judges to do this task. But the members of the Sanhedrin did not do this. When they came to the land, each of them occupied themselves with their vineyard, winery, and fields, declaring, "I have found peace for myself." They were unwilling to assume this great burden.
Okay, now that is an amazing text. Let's process that text for a moment. How do we normally think of judges? Today in society, judges are stationary. They sit in their courthouse or in their chambers, right? They're reactionary. You come to them, you say, this is what happened, and then the defense says, no, that's not what happened, this is what happened, and they try and decide what it is that happened outside, and then they have to give a ruling based upon what was decided happened outside. The only time you're going to find a judge leaving their court to go around and lecturing is if they're going to Oxford or to Yale or to some campus, or they're going to talk to students that want to hear their wisdom. You will not find a judge who's running around the countryside teaching morals to the regular people, to the masses. That's not how we vision judges. They're sitting in their robes, up in in their chambers. You did a crime, I'm going to tell you the punishment for your crime. And yet in Judaism, it's such a different perspective. The duties of being a member of the Sanhedrin, of being a member, one of the rabbis on the great court, the highest court of the entire Jewish people, was not only were you a judge and had to sit and give judgment, but you had to travel. And you had to teach. You had to go from city to city and engage with the community in inspiring them and in educating them in right and wrong and in morals and the values, etc. Which is really an amazing idea, especially when you consider that where was the Sanhedrin was situated? Inside the temple, in the holiest place that the Jewish people have. So we're telling the judges, you need to leave the Beit HaMikdash, you need to leave Jerusalem, you need to leave the holy place where you are. You also, the Sanhedrin was not allowed to give verdicts outside of the Beit HaMikdash. So they weren't even allowed to sit in judgment when they were traveling. So they would have to put their cases on pause, their vacation time, so to say, where they're going to get a backlog of cases, go travel, in order to downgrade for them, in order to be able to uplift and to educate the community. And if they don't do that, the blame for this horrific rape and murder that happened to this girl is laid at not the criminal's feet, but at their feet. Yes.
I'm not sure if that's entirely true.
What's true?
About judges, about judges today. Well, so I'm not an attorney, but I do know that there's some mandatory sentencing thing that goes on. So sometimes the judge, his or her
Tied.
is tied. But sometimes when they're not tied, they give judicious sentences to the people that are offenders, mostly the first time, where they would include more things like
Community service.
rehabilitation, community service, So,
But that's still reactionary. What you're describing is true. And lesson 4, we talked about sentencing reform, but it's a reactionary teaching. You committed a crime, you're coming to the courtroom, so instead of just dumping you in jail with a bunch of other criminals, I'm making you go out and clean the streets or whatever. I'm giving you some kind of learning, but it's still a reactionary. You committed a crime and now you're coming to me.
Our view is not that the judges are repositories of everything that's moral and that's educational and that's knowledgeable.
But a judge is meant...
Because most of them were politicians to begin with. That's how they got to be judges.
We can, this is not for today, whether or not judges should be elected or whether sheriffs should be elected. It's another discussion. Today's election day, so I hope everyone voted. But, so I was speaking to my brother about, elections and all that. But whether or not they are today, judges are paradigms of honesty or not, definitely in theory, a judge represents at least in Jewish thought anyway, they're the righteous members of society. They're the representatives of truth and justice and righteousness. They should, right?
It should stand out as more.
They should.
An example, and I always think of it as like judge in America. I just think they have a little extra like influence, and when you sit in their courtroom, you better know that's the judge, He's not just listening to everything, not even make the final.
Absolutely. Mark, and I'm going to get next. Yeah, Mark.
There are 2 points. First of all, judges aren't allowed to drum up business, and the populace has to be educated to bring their disputes to the court rather than settle them amongst themselves. That's one thing. And the second thing is, when our country was founded, the United States was founded, the judges were in sedentary, fixed places. We had circuit judges who went around the communities to enable people who cannot travel to bring their cases to a court of law.
What you're talking about is civil cases, right?
No, criminal cases too.
Well, you're saying bring your disputes to court. That's usually a civil dispute.
Right.
We haven't talked about civil law at all in any of these classes. We're primarily talking about crime. Every single community, you're always going to have a civil dispute between 2 business partners or 2 neighbors. That's just human nature, and you need to have some way of resolving it. We're discussing here crime, robbery.
Same thing with the criminal court system. Because American judges sit in both civil and criminal. So they handle all cases.